Okay, so let's be honest with ourselves for a second here. How do you actually feel when you're just sitting still? Not scrolling, not working, not planning or talking, just kind of being.
Yeah.
Does that little voice kick in, the one whispering you should be doing something? Maybe even like that you're wasting time.
Uh-huh. That feeling. You're describing something incredibly common. It really taps into this deep cultural conditioning we seem to have, this belief that, stillness equals inactivity, and maybe worse, inactivity equals failure.
Right, and that feeling, that really deeply ingrained belief.
Mm.
Well, that's exactly what our deep dive is challenging today. We're going to, unpack this fascinating stack of sources a listener sent over.
Hmm.
They dive into this wildly counterintuitive idea, the critical importance of actually making time to do absolutely nothing.
Yeah, our mission here is, I guess, simple, but it feels powerful. We're going to explore these sources and really try to dissect this notion that constant activity is the only way to succeed, and hopefully reveal why stillness is actually fundamental, like not optional, for our brains, our bodies, our overall well-being, really.
And we've got some pretty compelling material to guide us.
Mm.
Insights from a chapter looking right at this topic. It references studies from places like the University of Virginia, Harvard, and pieces from publications people know.
Mm.
So, yeah, let's really dig into this.
Okay, so let's start right there, that core challenge, the busy trap. Where does this feeling even come from? These sources suggest it's really about how we've been, I guess, trained to measure our own value.
Yeah, it feels like our very purpose, our worth, only becomes legitimate if it's actively serving something or someone else. Like if there's no external goal, no output people can see, we feel kind of pointless, which makes it incredibly hard to just be with ourselves, doesn't it?
Precisely. We're sort of wired to believe we're only doing something if that something can be seen or measured or, validated by others. Our identity gets all tangled up in our visible productivity.
And that internal pressure, that resistance to not doing,
Mm.
it shows up in some really surprising ways. There's a study mentioned in the sources from the University of Virginia that is honestly, it's kind of shocking.
It's a powerful illustration of exactly this resistance. Researchers basically asked over 700 people to just sit alone in a room for a short time, like 6 to 15 minutes, nothing to do but think. But here's the twist. They had access to a button they could press to give themselves a mild electric shock.
Wait, hold on. They could shock themselves.
Yep,
No.
absolutely. And the results were pretty startling. 67% of the men and 25% of the women, they chose to shock themselves at least once, rather than simply sit quietly with their own thoughts for that, like, really brief period.
Wow. They actually chose physical pain over just existing with their own mind for a few minutes. That really highlights how uncomfortable we've become with internal quiet, doesn't it?
It really does. And despite that, profound discomfort many people clearly feel, the sources argue that stillness isn't just a nice-to-have thing, it's psychologically imperative. Humans are fundamentally not designed to be on and running constantly, and trying to operate that way, well, it has significant detrimental effects. When busyness becomes our default, or even worse, our entire identity, we risk losing touch with who we are beyond the tasks. We kind of stop truly living actual lives in a way.
So that feeling of doing nothing, it's not accurate then, at all.
Not in the slightest, according to this. What looks like doing nothing from the outside, or even what feels like nothing on the inside if you're feeling restless, it's actually crucial internal work. It's essential for our physiological balance and, maintaining a genuinely happy, peaceful, sustainable lifestyle. That constant push isn't biological, it's cultural, and often it's profoundly unhealthy.
Okay. Okay, so if we're not just blankly staring into space, what is the brain doing in that resting state? You mentioned it's superpowering itself. What does that mean?
Well, that's the fascinating part, isn't it? When you shift into that less focused sort of do-nothing mode, your brain isn't just shutting down, not at all. It's actually engaging in really essential back-end processes.
Back-end process, like what? Cleaning up files in there?
You could kind of think of it that way, yeah. Your neural networks are busy. They're processing experiences from your conscious day, consolidating memories, reinforcing learning that just happened, integrating new information, and crucially, regulating your attention and your emotions. It's like vital maintenance work happening just beneath the surface.
And the payoff for allowing all this back-end work to happen.
A much more effective front end. Seriously. Giving your brain this time keeps you significantly more productive, more focused, and just generally more effective when you are actively engaged in tasks. It's not downtime away from productivity. It's the downtime that actually enables real productivity.
Which brings us right to the cost of not allowing this. The constant hustle. The sources make a powerful case that it isn't just inefficient, it's actually damaging. Because as humans, we're simply not wired for that continual high-energy output while we're conscious.
Exactly. Tony Schwartz, referencing research in, I think it was a New York Times piece, he highlighted how a lack of this crucial do-nothing time, and that includes getting enough sleep, was the single highest predictor of on-the-job burnout.
Burnout, yeah, that feels very real for a lot of people right now. And didn't he cite a Harvard study on the economic impact of this?
He did, yeah. That study estimated the cost of just sleep deprivation, which is a key part of this lack of do-nothing time. It cost American companies something staggering, like $63.2 billion a
Yeah.
year in lost productivity. That's not abstract, is it? That's a massive tangible cost tied directly to us not allowing ourselves to just switch off.
Wow.
Yeah.
And beyond the economics of the productivity cost, there's also this emotional toll, isn't there? The sources talk about actually facing your feelings.
Yes, this is a really critical point raised by Stephanie Brown in the materials. The common impulse when we're faced with difficult emotions is often to get busy, distract ourselves, avoid sitting with them. But she argues that actively avoiding them, refusing to reflect on or acknowledge what you feel, it paradoxically gives those feelings more power over you.
Right. There's that common idea, isn't there, that dwelling on things, thinking and feeling too much, it just slows you down or it's unproductive somehow.
And according to these sources, that's exactly backward. Suppressing difficult feelings doesn't make them vanish. It often leads to intrusive thoughts just popping up at unwanted moments. And what do people often do then? They become even busier, specifically trying to drown those thoughts out. So it becomes this self-perpetuating cycle, really fueled by avoidance. Stillness then becomes the necessary pause to actually address and maybe disarm those feelings.
So stillness isn't just about resting the brain for productivity or processing feelings, but it's also somehow deeply connected to creativity. That seems, well, counterintuitive. Doesn't creativity require actively doing something, working hard at it?
Well, the sources argue pretty much the opposite, that creativity often thrives precisely in stillness, in that state of nothingness. It's not always born from intensely focused effort right on the task itself. Instead, it seems to be fostered by stepping away, allowing the mind to just wander, or even just engaging in unrelated sort of day-to-day tasks that require less intense focus.
The mind wandering, letting those unexpected connections happen.
Exactly. The sources point out that really deeply creative people often deliberately free themselves from rigid structures and schedules. They do it specifically to allow this mental meandering. They understand that insights don't always arrive on command.
Kind of like Einstein's whole way of thinking. Wasn't there something about intuition?
Precisely. He talked about the sacred intuitive mind as the real source of discovery, and he contrasted it with the rational mind, which he saw as important, sure, but ultimately its servant. It suggests the big breakthroughs often bubble up from that less structured, intuitive space that stillness helps create.
Okay, so if the brain needs this back-end work and creativity benefits from mind wandering, it's starting to sound like maybe achieving more goals actually comes from less constant grinding effort.
That's really the core argument here. Yeah, you're actually more likely to achieve your long-term goals. And crucially, maintain a healthier, happier life while you're doing it if you work on them intermittently.
Rather than just keeping your foot slammed on the gas pedal the whole time.
Exactly that. Keeping your mind in that constant state of intense, focused activity without any real breaks. It isn't just tiring. The sources describe that kind of perpetual stress as both life-shortening and quality-depleting. When you neglect your health, your relationships, your basic mental state in this relentless pursuit of a goal, you're far more likely to just hit a wall, reach saturation point, and potentially give up entirely. Stillness helps prevent that kind of burnout.
Which leads us nicely into the broader benefits, doesn't it? Connecting this idea of stillness to mindfulness and just general well-being.
Right. Stillness is almost like a gateway to mindfulness, that state of being more fully aware of the present moment without judgment. And the sources cite a really wide array of benefits that come from cultivating this practice.
It's quite a list when you see it laid out, isn't it?
It really is. We're talking about things like reducing general stress levels, improving memory and cognitive function, decreasing emotional reactivity, which is huge for just navigating daily life, right? It leads to more satisfaction in relationships, increases cognitive flexibility, that ability to adapt your thinking. It fosters empathy and compassion, and generally decreases experiences of anxiety and depression. Ultimately, it's linked again and again to a significant increase in overall quality of life.
Wow. That is That's a powerful endorsement for something that often feels like you're just doing nothing.
And that's the point the sources really try to hammer home in reframing this whole idea. Stillness isn't a break from what you're supposed to be doing. It's not some optional add-on or a reward for being busy. It's presented as something fundamental, something human beings are quite literally designed for.
Yeah, there's that great quote from Tim Kreider in the material that really captures this idea. Idleness being essential.
He argues beautifully, doesn't he, that idleness isn't a vice or just, a vacation. It's indispensable, like vitamin D is to the body. He says without it, we suffer a kind of mental affliction as disfiguring as rickets. Pretty strong words.
And he says that idleness provides the space and the quiet needed for standing back from life and seeing it whole, for
Mhm.
making those unexpected connections, for simply waiting for inspiration to arrive.
And in that powerful paradox, he points out that it's actually a necessary condition for getting any meaningful work done at all.
So to kind of wrap up this deep dive into the sources then, the core message we're seeing seems crystal clear. Stillness isn't laziness. It's not wasted time. It is a fundamental, maybe non-negotiable requirement for optimal cognitive function, emotional regulation, creativity, sustainable productivity, and just achieving a higher, more fulfilling quality of life. It's not a bug in our system, it's actually a feature built into our design.
Yeah, this exploration really asks us to question our own assumptions, doesn't it? What does diving into these sources mean for you, listening right now? How might intentionally building some actual doing nothing, real stillness into your own life? How might that change your experience of work, your relationships, your stress levels, your overall well-being?
And maybe the most provocative thought to leave you with is this. If our culture so actively pushes against something our minds and bodies are fundamentally designed to need, what else might we be getting fundamentally wrong about how to live and work effectively, creatively, and perhaps most importantly, happily?